watching Mr. Mark Reads. I am JT. This is Mr. Mark. Hope you enjoy The Widow's Broom.
Good job, buddy. Thank you. Thanks for the song, too. So this is another book by one of my favorite authors, Chris Van Allsburg. And I think I've mentioned before that he has won all kinds of awards for his stories, but also for his artwork. And he always has a dog in it, and you'll see this one fairly easily. And he always has a mysterious ending, so be on the lookout for something tricky at the end. The Widow's Broom. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden bursts of energy that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that in their youth outraced hawks are now passed by slow-flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. On very rare occasions, however, a broom can lose its power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Minna Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered the witch lying in her vegetable garden. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, though, and because she was a kind woman, Minna Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Minna Shaw to draw the curtains and then wrapped herself tightly in her black cape and fell soundly asleep. And she lay there perfectly still all day and all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed and moved silently through the widow's house. Minna Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of those red hot coals in her hand. And outside she made a fire then of twigs and leaves. And then she dropped a strand of her hair into the flame. And the fire hissed and cackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. And before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. And the two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing toward the garden where the old broom rested. And then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. When Minna Shaw woke up, she wasn't surprised to find that her guests had gone. Witches, she knew, had these unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw that the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was just an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in her kitchen. And she began using it around the house and found that it was no better or no worse than the broom she'd used before. But one morning, Minna Shaw was still in bed when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. And she peeked and she saw something that made her heart jump, because there was the broom sweeping the floor all by itself. It stopped for a moment, turned to the widow, and then went back to work. At first, Minna was frightened, but the broom seemed harmless and What's more, it was doing a very good job. Unfortunately, it swept all day long. And in the evening, to get some peace, she locked the broom in the closet. But when it tapped on the door for more than an hour, Minna felt guilty and let it out. And as she lay in bed listening to the broom sweeping each room over and over and over, she wondered if it could learn to do other things. So in the morning, she led the broom outside and found out that it was a very good student. She needed to show it how to do something only one time. Soon the broom could chop wood and fetch water and feed the chickens and bring the cow in from pasture. It could even pick out simple tunes on the piano. Well, not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spiveys, found out about the broom. Now, their farm was just down the road, and it was the only other place around. It was one of the 8 Spivey children who saw the broom first. And when the boy told his father, Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she really have such a broom?" "Oh, yes," Minna Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbor all about the broom and the witch who'd left it behind. And she took him around to the back of the house where the broom was hard at work splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. This here's a wicked broom. This is a wicked thing. This here's the devil." And the broom stopped working, still clutching the axe, hopped toward the widow with her and her neighbor, and Mr. Spivey, red-faced with anger, turned quickly and hurried on home. Well, soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree it probably was a wicked thing, but their wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow, and it could play the piano well, considering that it struck just one note at a time. No one's feelings, though, were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. That there broom's evil, it's dangerous," he told everyone who'd listen. "We all gonna be sorry if this thing stays amongst us." So as the days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and as hard-working as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping still brought it special pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do around the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Minna Shaw's and the Spivey's farms. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself out there for hours. One afternoon, though, 2 of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. And when they saw what it was doing, they kicked small stones the broom had swept aside back into its path. The broom just ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys wouldn't leave it alone. They called the broom names, and when it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple of sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. And finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the 2 boys and knocked them both on the head so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey dog ran after it, yapping and biting at its bristles. "Get him!" the boys yelled, and the little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle. But he wasn't there for long. There he is, and there he is again. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house, and he was not alone. 3 men from neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden stake and coils of rope. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly, and when she opened the door, Minna was frightened by what she saw. "We done come for the broom," her neighbor told her. "Done beat my sons up and likely done worse than my dog. Poor animal wasn't nowhere to be found." The widow could tell by their faces that the men would not be leaving without her broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently, and then she answered, "Of course you're right. if it could do such a thing, we need to get rid of it. And she led the men into her kitchen. It sleeps in here, she whispered, pointing to the closet. If you move it carefully, it won't wake up. And the men knew how strong the broom was, and they hoped the widow was right. They opened the closet door, revealing that slumbering broom, and one of the farmers took it out and gently held it against a stake while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. And they carried that broom outside, drove the stake into the ground, and gathered straw around it. And Mr. Spivey lit the fire, and in no time the flames had turned the broom into ashes. Well, life soon returned to normal around the widow's farm. Spiveys even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a tall spruce tree. And then one morning, Minna Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the broom. It was white as snow and moving through the woods at night, and it was carrying the axe. Mr. Spivey did not believe her, but that night, under a full moon, he watched from a window as the broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night it returned, circling even closer. And the night after, it came again, and this time it tapped the axe lightly on the Spivey's door. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivey, they packed their dearest possessions and 8 children into their wagon. And Mr. Spivey tried to convince the widow to leave with him, but she chose to stay behind in her little farmhouse. She went down the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors, and Mr. Spivey called out, "You a brave woman, you a brave woman to stay there." Well, that evening, though, the widow fell asleep in her chair by the fire. She had been listening to music, simple tunes played one note at a time on the piano. The gentle tap on her shoulder awoke her, and she looked up and smiled at the broom. Not a ghost at all, but still covered with a coat of white paint that she had given it. And Minna Shaw said, "You play so nicely." And the broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. The end. What a great story.